All right, today we are tackling a huge question, one that gets to the very heart of the Christian faith. We're going to dig into the evidence behind the New Testament and uncover why the experts use this fascinating phrase to describe it, an embarrassment of riches. Let's get into it. I mean, it's a totally fair question, isn't it? We're talking about writings from 2,000 years ago, long before the printing press, long before cloud backups. How in the world can we be sure that the book you can buy today is what those authors actually wrote way back then? Well, that's the mystery we're going to solve. And right off the bat, here's the main challenge. The originals, the actual pages that the apostles wrote on, what scholars call the autographs, they're gone. They've been lost to time. Every single manuscript we have today is a copy of a copy of a copy. Now, that sounds like a massive problem, but as you're about to see, it's actually the key to this whole historical detective story.
So where does any good detective start? You start with the clues, right? The physical evidence. And for us, that means looking at what these ancient texts were actually written on. So the earliest Christian writings were put on papyrus. You can think of it as the everyday paper of the ancient world. Pretty fragile, didn't last forever. Later, scribes switched to parchment or vellum, which is made from animal hides and is way, way more durable. But what's really cool is the format. See, most of the world used scrolls back then, but early Christians were innovators. They pioneered the use of the Codex, which is basically the book format we still use today. It was a game changer, letting them gather all the Gospels or Paul's letters into one convenient volume. And this isn't just theory. We have the actual evidence. Take this little guy, P52. It's a tiny scrap of John's Gospel, but it's dated as early as AD 125. Think about that. That's maybe a single generation after John himself wrote it. Then you have these absolute treasures, like the Codex Sinaiticus, the oldest complete New Testament that we have. These are real things you can go and see in a museum. Okay, so we have some really early copies. That's great. But how does this evidence compare to other famous books from the ancient world? Well, this is where the story goes from interesting to absolutely mind-blowing. Just look at this table. It's wild. For Plato's writings, our earliest copy comes a staggering 1,200 years after he lived, and we only have about 7 of them. For Caesar's famous Gallic Wars, there's a nearly 1,000-year gap and just 10 copies. Now, look at the New Testament. The time gap can be as short as 25 to 50 years, and the number of copies we have, over 25,000. It's not just a little better. It's not even in the same league.
This chart really puts it into perspective. Look at that. The evidence for the New Testament is that skyscraper on the left. And Homer's Iliad, which is the runner-up, is still just a fraction of that. Everything else from the ancient world, it's barely a blip on the radar. The evidence is in a category all by itself.
So, this incredible mountain of evidence brings us to the core idea for today. This fascinating paradox that scholars have a great name for. They call it an embarrassment of riches. But what on earth does that mean? Well, the phrase comes from guys like Eldon J. Epp. And the embarrassment here is a good thing. It's the kind of problem you want to have. It's the problem of having too much evidence. A scholar studying Plato would kill for just one more copy from a different time. A New Testament scholar is buried under thousands upon thousands of them. It's a wealth of data we just don't see anywhere else in history. But having all those copies, all painstakingly written by hand over centuries, it introduces a new twist. Because when you compare all 25,000 of them, you find differences. And scholars have cataloged about 400,000 of these differences, or variants. And there it is, the paradox. It seems totally backwards, right? How could having more copies with more differences possibly make you more sure of what the original said? Shouldn't it just create more confusion and make you less certain? This is where we crack the case wide open. Because believe it or not, that massive number of copies is exactly what allows us to get back to the original with such amazing confidence. It all comes down to a special kind of science. That science is called textual criticism. And really, it's the process of lining up all the copies, comparing them word for word, and figuring out where a scribe might have made a mistake. By doing this, you can reconstruct the original wording, and the more copies you have, the better this process works. Think about it like this. If you only have one witness to a crime, you just have to take their story at face value. But what if you have 10 witnesses? You'll find small differences, right? One says the getaway car was blue, another says dark blue. But their agreement on the main story, that a robbery happened, makes the core facts more certain. Now imagine you have over 5,000 witnesses, like we do with the Greek manuscripts.
Those trivial errors, like the exact shade of blue, become super obvious and easy to spot, allowing you to reconstruct the original event with incredible accuracy.
So what about that big, scary number, 400,000 variants? Well, let's break it down. A whopping 75% of them are just simple spelling mistakes or scribes changing the word order, things that don't change the meaning one bit. Think John versus John. Most of the rest are obvious slips of the pen that are easy to identify. When you boil it all down, less than 1% of all these variants are both meaningful and actually plausible. And these are the ones you see in the little footnotes in modern Bibles. And here's the crucial part. Not one of them affects any core Christian doctrine. Not a single one.
So, after looking at all this evidence, what's the final verdict from the experts who've spent their entire lives studying these ancient manuscripts? Sir Frederick Kenyon, who is the director of the British Museum, a man who knew a thing or two about ancient documents, put it pretty clearly. He said the time gap is so small and the evidence so overwhelming that the text's authenticity is beyond reasonable doubt. And another giant in the field, F.F. Bruce, really drives the point home. We all accept the works of Caesar or Plato without a second thought, even though the evidence for them is just a tiny fraction of what we have for the New Testament. If we apply the same historical standard, the New Testament is on the firmest ground of any book from the ancient world. In fact, when you put it all together, the scholarly consensus is that we can be certain of about 99.5% of the original wording of the New Testament, and that embarrassment of riches, all those thousands of copies, is the very reason we can have that incredible level of confidence.
So in the end, the mountain of evidence really settles the question. We're not left wondering if the apostles' writings were preserved. The much bigger, more profound question it leaves us with is why? Why was this specific collection of ancient writings copied, cherished, and handed down with a level of care and passion that is simply unmatched in human history?